Thanks, everybody. So we're going to have a physicist talking about economics and political science today, so I hope that goes well. In any case, one of the things that I really love about teaching at Wheaton is the attitudes Wheaton students have towards climate change and the dedication that so many of them have towards making a difference and taking personal action to try to reduce their impact, reduce their carbon footprint, and try to do something personal about the problem. But I want to make a challenge to you and ask you, how do you know that the things you're doing to try to prevent climate change are actually making a significant difference? They say that every little bit helps, but are you sure that all the little bits that you're doing add up to a real significant contribution, or are just little bits around the edges that don't actually accomplish much? All right? How do you know that you're effectively fighting climate change? All right? This is a really difficult problem for a wide variety of reasons. One is that the right choices aren't always obvious, and sometimes the obvious choices turn out to be wrong. Just to pique your interest, suppose you wanted to change your diet, change the way you eat so that you could reduce your carbon footprint. Would it be better to become a locavore and try to get all your food from near where you live? Or would it be better to, for example, substitute out beef for more chicken in your diet? All right? I'm not going to tell you the answer to that. It turns out one of them is much better than the other. The point is that figuring out which one is better is a very difficult task and would involve a whole lot of math, which it took me a couple hours to do, and you probably aren't interested in doing. All right? The other problem is that sometimes you don't actually have a choice. Okay? For example, about a quarter of the fossil fuel consumption that you're responsible for is not gasoline that you burned in your car or even electricity that you used at your house. It's fuel that was used to create the products that you bought and are using, or to power the businesses that provide services to you. And you have very little say in how those businesses are run and what sort of green techniques are used for you, in those. So simply banking on personal choices to solve the climate problem, even if everybody's trying to make good personal choices, which is not true, is problematic. This quote suggests that in addition to good personal choices, we're going to need laws and money. So let's look at those options. If it really is too difficult and too much work to go through the 50 things you can do to save the Earth that you might find on BuzzFeed and parse through all of them and figure out which one is best, all right? Maybe we can have government help us with this solution, all right? And that is a viable solution, and it really would work. We could have, for example, a department of climate change that could take a close look at every business in America, every business process, and every product made, and decide which were being made with sustainable green values and which were producing too much emissions and needed to be banned. Well, think about what would happen. A horde of lobbyists from every company in the United States descends on this bureaucracy and tries to convince the poor bureaucrats that our company's products are green enough to be allowed and our competitors should be banned. All right? It's kind of a nightmare to imagine. And also, with trillions of dollars on the line, there's a real serious potential for corruption and fraud and abuse of power. And nobody wants that. While government solutions can work, maybe we should be looking for other solutions. Not ones that are completely devoid of government, but ones that minimize the level of bureaucracy and potential for corruption. Now, I'm here to sell you on a better strategy. One that means that you don't have to do any work to figure out which option is the best for you, and one that doesn't involve a huge government bureaucracy that has its tendrils in every aspect of the American economy. I'm here to sell you on the revenue-neutral carbon tax. So here's how it works. When fossil fuel comes out of the ground or is imported into the country, the federal government would levy a tax on it. And the purpose of this tax is to raise the price of fossil fuels. Typically, taxes, the revenue that's gained, the point of raising the tax is to use that money to spend on something important. But here, we almost don't care what it gets used for. The point is the tax itself. all right? As we raise the price of fossil fuels, people will be encouraged to switch towards more renewable energy, all right? And now the side question is, what do we do with the money that the government collects? Now, I am a fairly liberal Democrat, and I can think of lots of great government programs that I would love to spend this money on. All right, but it's important for political reasons that I'll explain later that we don't do that. We take all that money and return it back to the American citizen, so that the net revenue effect for the federal government is zero, all right? But that doesn't mean that it's a wash, because the money would be returned equally, in this, my version of this, to every US citizen, all right? So everybody would get a check at the end of the quarter, which is their share of the money raised through the tax, all right? And so look at what would happen. The guy on the left gets most of his energy from fossil fuels and ends up paying more under a carbon tax system, all right? And then the guy on the right, who's using mostly renewable energy. The guy on the left says, how can I avoid these onerous taxes? And the answer is, I could save money by switching to renewable energy. In this system, tax avoidance is a virtue, and it's actually what we're shooting for. All right, so the great thing about this is not just how it affects the behavior of individuals, but how those effects trickle down through the entire economy. All right, so you can imagine that every factory and every business in the United States is trying to minimize its costs so it can maximize its profit. And if, thanks to the carbon tax, renewable energy is a cheaper solution for it, each entity in the economy is more likely to switch towards renewable energy. If it doesn't, then the extra costs from the carbon tax are reflected in higher prices for goods and services created using that. And so you as the consumer will find that products that ended up being made with large amounts of fossil fuels, or were made with products that were made with products that were made with products that were made with higher fossil fuels, will end up costing more. And so you as a consumer don't need to do any research. All you have to do is buy whatever's cheapest, which, let's be honest, is probably what you were going to do anyway. All right, but here it works out to being. All right, so there is, look at what we've done here. Traditionally, capitalism in the free market is seen as the enemy of the environment. And the reason for this is the one thing that free market competition is good at doing is lowering prices. But environmental costs don't have a dollar value traditionally. Plundering the environment is free. And so as a result, capitalism doesn't care. What this system does is it puts a monetary value on environmental damage, allowing the free market economy to do what it does best and minimize those costs, minimizing environmental damage. All right? And so this allows capitalism to be a servant of environmentalism rather than an opponent. So hopefully that seems like a reasonable idea, but I want to point one sort of side issue that we need to deal with before we move on, and that's the fact that it turns out there are other countries. So let's think about what would happen if another country that doesn't have a carbon tax brings goods into the US. Without a carbon tax, their goods will be cheaper than ours, and so everybody will buy them. That's bad because it hurts domestic industry, but also because it means that we still end up using the same amount of dirty fossil fuels. Those fossil fuels are simply consumed in some other country, and that doesn't help the Earth. So in order to make the scheme work, it's vital that we add to the price of imported goods by adding a tariff on goods that are coming in specifically from countries that don't have a carbon tax. And that means that if we do this, we level the playing field and everything works. It has a side benefit that it encourages countries to implement a carbon tax of their own, because if they do, they're exempt from our carbon tariff and have a more favorable trade status with the United States. And so it's a virtuous circle in which countries start encouraging each other, spiraling out from whoever started it. And it doesn't have to be the US. But if it does, this would affect us too. All right. So this, by the way, is also the reason why this has to be a national effort. In some cases, states have tried to set up a carbon tax, and the problem is that all this applies with respect to how one state deals with other states. And imported goods from a non-carbon tax state run into the same problem that you have here. And states, unlike nations, can't establish tariffs on imports. So in order to make this work, it really does have to be a national policy. And boy, that's going to run us into trouble. Because maybe you've noticed that in Washington, D.C., there's a whole bunch of people who don't believe in climate change and hate taxes. So how on earth are we ever going to get this done? All right? It's a common belief that, Republicans, as a rule, oppose environmental action and don't believe in climate change. But that's overly simplistic by a long shot. If you do a survey, you find that 2/3 of Americans overall believe that climate change is real, caused by humans, and that we should do something about it. And that includes a full 1/3 of registered Republicans. If you ask specifically whether people are in favor of a revenue-neutral carbon tax, once you explain what that means, you get about 2/3 of registered US voters, and almost half of Republicans are in favor of it. There are two groups within the Republican Party. There's a group that believes that climate change is real and we need to do something about it, but they don't like what they consider top-down, heavy-handed tactics that have been proposed by the Democrats so far. And there's a hardcore of we totally don't believe in climate change folks who, quite frankly, we're not going to be able to get on our side. But the point is that there's a group of moderate Republicans who, if we can propose a solution that appeals to their political values, we can end up with a substantial majority of the American public on our side. All right, that's all well and good, but what about leadership? Well, you might suspect that all the Republican politicians are definitely going to be opposed to that, but you might be surprised. Some of the people who are going out on CNN and talking in the Wall Street Journal and trying to push the idea of a carbon tax aren't the hippy-dippy liberal environmentalists that you might expect. They're people like former cabinet members of the George W. Bush administration or former CEO of Walmart, all right? For these people, they recognize that there's a problem and they see that this sort of modified free market solution is palatable in terms of their ideology. From my perspective as a climate scientist, I just want to do something about this problem, and however it gets done doesn't really matter. All right, so I wanted to point out, what about the oil companies? They stand a lot to lose. They're going to fight it, right? Well, it turns out that CEOs of Royal Dutch Shell, BP, and ExxonMobil have all said that they'll go along with this plan. Not that they like it per se, but that it's better than any of the alternatives that have been proposed. And the reason is because this provides a level playing field with organized rules, and they know that some government bureaucrat isn't going to suddenly just shut them off one day without them having anything to say about it. It's an organized system that they feel like they can work with. All right, so hopefully I've convinced you that there's a surprising number of people who you wouldn't expect are on board with this plan. All right, and that's important because we really can't afford to wait. And I want to downplay expectations because there's one group that I haven't mentioned yet, which is the folks currently in the White House, who, quite frankly, I do not believe are ever going to be on board with this plan. All right, so it's unlikely we'll be able to get this done in the next 4 years. However, following that, we need to be united in a large group with bipartisan support to propose a plan that is workable and gets a large majority of the Americans on board immediately. Not spend another 5 or 10 years messing around trying to discuss which plan is better and so on. We need to be ready, because if we wait another 5 or 10 years beyond that, then keeping global warming below 2 degrees C, which is proposed as the target point, is going to be practically impossible. All right? So I want to close with a quote from a well-known environmentalist, Winston Churchill, who said, talking about a different topic, "Owing to past neglect, in the face of plainest warnings, we've now entered upon a period of great danger. The era of procrastination, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients and delays is coming to a close, where in its place we are entering a period of consequences." So I'd like us to unite behind a bipartisan solution that can adequately deal with those consequences in an organized and fairly simple way. So that's it.